I think the thing that holds artists back the most is feeling like everything they make needs to be the impenetrable best thing in the universe. And the reality is that you're going to make a billion bad things before you make one good one. Typically, there are maybe exceptions to that rule. I understand being your biggest critic and holding yourself to a standard. But if you do that to the point where it debilitates your creative process and keeps you from writing or creating, you are only hurting yourself. You will not make things.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the About Story podcast. My name is Nathan Johnson, and today I'm joined by Jesse Haugen. Jesse.
Hey Nathan. How's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm going to completely just take this away from you for a second.
Do it.
Because I don't know if you even know this, but I was thinking about this when I came over here today. You were the first person ever who let me score their film. Do you know that?
I don't know if I was the first. I knew I was one of the first. I didn't know I was the first.
So it was not the first film I finished.
Oh, okay.
Because after I started that one, another person let me score a film, and that had a sooner deadline.
Right.
The first time I ever wrote music to picture was for your film. So this is a sweet reunion because I almost have not seen you since that moment. So this is great. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm really happy to have you here, man. And talking about that film, that was one of my first films that I kind of directed.
Oh,
the first
really?
Yeah. So that was just a really cool experience. And I know for that film too, I wanted the music to be really strong.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be really impactful because it was a big part of the story.
We did a song.
Yeah. You wrote a song for it.
Song
Yeah, it was
in
legit.
the middle of the film, in a short film. Yeah, it's very ambitious. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you've come a long way since then too. You've made some other films. That wasn't your only film.
Yeah, that's right. It didn't stop there.
Yeah.
There's been a lot since then. But I credit it's so hard when you're starting out doing anything artistic for people to give you opportunities because that was a student film. Right. And so to some degree risks were low.
Yeah.
But in the other hand, it's still something you spent a lot of time and effort on, and you don't want to have someone come in and just kind of, get it all messy.
Yeah.
When you're looking for something that maybe could jumpstart a career or be a great reel piece or something.
Yeah.
And so, you taking a chance on someone who had nothing to show you in terms of I've done this before, just a lot of false confidence in convincing you that I could.
But you did have a really great ear for music, which
Sure.
is, because you were in the music department at Biola. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd written a lot of music.
Yeah.
For sure. There's writing music is one thing, writing it to picture is another thing. And it's something I always knew that I wanted to do, but until you do it, you don't know. Yeah.
So how did you kind of get started? Did you grow up in California?
I was actually born on a cattle ranch in North Dakota.
Really? Okay.
Yes,
I didn't know that.
Literally middle of nowhere. For anyone out there who knows North Dakota geography, we were about an hour outside of Fargo, which North Dakota is kind of a perfect rectangle. So the southeasternmost corner, there's a pretty big city called Fargo. It's right on the border of North Dakota and Minnesota. So we had a farm that was about an hour outside of there, no neighbors. There are people miles away. The closest small town to us has a population of 12. No gas station. It had a restaurant. It was more like a bar where they make frozen pizzas and a pizza oven, So I was born there, lived there till I was 10. And then my dad actually moved our whole family out, stopped the family ranching business to come out here and get his graduate degree at Biola, which is the school that both of us went to. That's how I got introduced to California. And, I was 10 years old, which is long enough to have a life in North Dakota, but California feels like my home. So I definitely feel like I grew up here. Even though I have a very different, childhood from a lot of people who grew up here. Back in the North Dakota days, I did love music, and I remember always wanting to play guitar. And for some reason, we had someone out there who said that my arms were too short, so I had to learn piano first. Literally, I remember that. And so I learned piano, and that kind of went okay. Teacher moved away. We moved here, same thing, tried to do piano again. Teacher moved away. And finally, my parents were like, okay, you can learn guitar. I don't know if my arms had grown or what. So I started learning guitar, and that's when like my interest exploded. And the thing that I realized when I started learning music was like, I am not satisfied learning music that other people had written. I felt like, you know, I would learn a song and that felt like an accomplishment, but I didn't feel like I could own it, like it was mine. And for some reason, that was a big deal to me. Like, in retrospect, I don't really know why. And so what that led me to do was like, okay, I'm learning this stuff. Like, I feel like I could just make this up, you know? And so that...
Like, I'm a smart guy. I
can
do this.
This can't be that hard. One thing led to another, and all of a sudden that was like, that began a lifelong journey of how do I write and create the music that I'm learning? And it literally was almost just started like a challenge and a way to feel like I could own the things that I was playing. So that, you know, took me into junior high and became a thing where I was like writing music for our little jazz band in junior high. We had like a praise band, so I was writing music for them. And then I got into a band, and so I was writing music for our band. We were making instrumental music, so it wasn't like songs. Like, it was more like film music in the sense that it was instrumental and dramatic, and even cinematic to a degree. Like, we were kind of interested in that style, and that carried into high school. Kept trying to write for ensembles in high school. We had like an orchestra in high school. Wrote some music for them, kept writing music in the band. Eventually people started telling me like, oh, your music sounds like film music. And up until that point, literally in high school, I did not realize that music in movies wasn't just taken and put into movies. I thought that, you know, you just found songs and put them in. I didn't realize people were writing music for movies
directly for the film itself.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. And so as soon as I realized that, it just immediately, I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't even know if I would like doing it, but I was like, I want to do that.
That's awesome.
And then people like you saying, sure, you go for it. You know,
I was like, this guy seems to know more about music than I do.
Sure.
So
that's a good place to start. Yeah, right. Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you end up going to Biola?
The truth is, and I'm sorry for all the Biola lovers out there, I really wanted to go to USC. Really, really bad. And
I applied to USC too.
Yeah. You want to know the kicker about the USC thing is my brother, shout out Jesse Haugen, got into USC and chose not to go there. And that felt like the biggest, like, oh, you didn't get into USC, did you, Jesse? Well, I did, but I chose somewhere else. I really wanted to go to USC, obviously, because of its intimate connection with the industry, and just recognized even at that point how important that aspect of it would be. Plus, I mean, the people teaching film composition at USC are like the people. But didn't get into USC largely because... I shared earlier that I didn't even realize film composing was a job until sometime in high school. So I had nothing to show. And USC, when you're applying to USC, even as an undergrad, you have to have like a reel.
Yeah, it's stiff competition.
Everything.
Really. Yeah.
So it's a good thing I didn't get into some degree because I was leagues behind. I got accepted to Biola. I applied to those two schools. Got accepted to Biola. Once, I got over the sadness of leaving USC. I was excited to go to Biola. And Biola ended up being great in large part because I got to meet all of your people, which are all the film people. Pretty much all of the work that I've done over the last 10 years or so has directly related back to someone I met in the film school at Biola. So, I mean, I can't look back and say that wasn't the best possible place for me to be, because it definitely was.
Yeah.
And, I get asked a lot, what is it worth going to school if you want to do this kind of thing? And I think the thing that's undeniable about going to school is the connection, just being around people in a similar level of experience as you, with a similar passion, going into a similar field. I mean, that's unparalleled, because where else do you find that? I feel like you always find people who are too busy to talk to you about it, or are like more clueless than you. and just having the camaraderie of like, we're all learning this together, we're all honing our skills together, and we can actually use each other to that end. I mean, that was undeniably valuable to me. So yeah, that's sort of how Biola became a thing and what that meant.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's a great school, and I still work with people there today. And what you said is so true about making connections, because that's really like how you're gonna, like, people like, how do I find a job? It's like, you got to meet people.
Yep.
It's a people business.
It is.
As much as it's like a technical, creative business, it's also a people business.
100%.
And people are going to hire you because it's like, oh yeah, I know this guy. My friend.
Yeah.
There's this guy, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's how you get your jobs.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard because on the one hand, it's like you want your work to speak for itself, and it does, and it is important. I mean, people are smart enough not to hire clueless people, but so much work I've gotten and work I've given for people I've hired for things, it's just because, like, this person is really cool and really kind, and I have a really good time with them. And making stuff is hard and takes a long time, and if I can do it while being surrounded with people that I really like and make it fun, like, that's like so important.
That's the dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's the dream.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Awesome. So I know this is a long time ago, but let's talk a little bit about your first film that you worked with me. Like,
absolutely.
let's talk about that. Like,
Yeah.
what was, because I think if I remember, like, I was looking for a composer, and I was like, there weren't actually many composers at that time. I think there was more of a split between the music department and the film department. And there wasn't much of a crossover.
That's right.
And then I remember, like, we just needed, I really wanted, like, a good soundtrack, and I didn't know what to do. So I was just like, I went into the music department, and I was just like, hey, I'm looking for a composer to work on my film.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to help me?
Right. And I remember here, so I think what you actually did was, there was
Film Music
Club,
Guild, maybe, or
Guild.
Guild
Might have been Guild. And I think you went to one of their meetings.
Yeah.
And that was like all the composers who were interested in film music, except me, because for whatever reason, I never went to that, which in retrospect was a big mistake. But I don't know. I talked to another composer who I think was president of it at the time. I think it was Hannah Parrott. And she told me about it. And I was like, oh, I got to get in contact with this guy. And that's that. So I even heard about it indirectly. and you're like, you weren't even at the meeting. That was definitely how it sort of got started.
But it worked out. It definitely worked out.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
you went on to work on, I feel like at a point, I would say you and probably Hannah Parrott, you guys were like probably the most in-demand composers for a minute there at Biola.
Oh, yeah.
At Biola.
Yeah, there was, I think we overlapped for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, like, this is going to turn into a Hannah Parrott appreciation podcast.
Well, she's amazing. I really want to have her on the show as well.
You should have her on the show. She definitely would do it.
Yeah.
When I came into Biola feeling like, oh, this is very contemporary, classical, conservatory, it's a lot of C's, education. She scored it was based on like a comic book he had made up where the superhero comes to life and helps this kid at school.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched that film and I was like, this is a film score. Like, this is it. And just immediately the mix of like adoration for Hannah's work on that project and like the fire under me that's like, by the time I graduate, I need to be able to write music half as good as this for film. The semester after or something, ended up doing the Biola film. That was the first film I ever finished. That was American Spy. That experience of like watching her and what she had done and just being like, I have to get there. That was, that was it did not feel attainable, but it was like a tangible goal. The in-demand Biola composer and just kind of having that like, oh, I want to be there,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's I feel like that's how we all start out. Everybody's inspired by somebody to like take that next step, and I think it's cool when you can kind of turn around and inspire the people coming behind you, and I feel like you've done that as well.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. I remember there were a couple, because they had like not a full-on buddy program at Biola, but a thing where incoming freshmen could meet with, and so they would try to pair you with people who are interested in the thing that you're interested with. And I had a meeting with a composer named Jordan Davis, who's still composing. He just graduated. He's awesome. And he was one, I would say, who like we immediately connected, and we still talk and meet. And it's just cool to see, you know, the things he's accomplished and where he's going. And it is the thing that I hate the most, and I'm not even saying I have the power to do this, but the thing I hate the most is gatekeeping. And so like people like Hannah, to me, being so accomplished and just so kind and willing to talk to me about stuff. And then, you know, I started a YouTube channel where I'm trying to do that more as well. And then professors at Biola like Mike Watts, who does orchestration and composing for everyone, just unbelievably kind and helpful. It's like, that's just what it should always be. It should always be reaching down to pull up the next person, and then they reach down, and everyone just keeps reaching down, you know.
And then you all move up together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your process. So like when someone approaches you, you've been working for a number of years now. When someone approaches you with a film and they're like, hey, Jesse, I have this film. I want you to do the music for it. Like, where do you start?
Well, every time I start with like immediate excitement and want to neglect the thing I'm currently working on. I always say that my favorite project is the next project. So when someone approaches me and said that they want me to score their film, I just immediately, that's, I think, when I'm at my most baseline creative. And so the first thing I start doing is imagining what that could be, even before I've seen the film, which is, then I try to slow myself down and, you know, we'll hash out details and contract and all of that boring stuff. The real first important thing is to sit down with the director or the producer, or the director and the producer, watch the film and have what we call a spotting session, which is basically, here's the film in its current state, which is either pretty much done or not close to done. There's like an assembly cut or something. At that point, we'll go through, and they've either layered in temp music, which is music that already exists, that sort of is a placeholder for what the score will be, or there's no music. Either way, it's the same process. You just go through and you figure out, where do we want music? What kind of music do we want? What's the point of it being there? What do we want it to accomplish? What problem is it trying to solve, or dramatic or narrative element that it's trying to emphasize? How is music going to serve this film? And that, you know, that can be a long conversation and a long process before any music is written, is just narratively and emotionally figuring out what it needs to do. Because film music is a servant of the film. It is not even, it's not separate from it. And the worst film music I've written is when I've tried to make cool music. The best film music I've written is when I've made music for the film. Like, just get rid of all other insecurities about like, oh, this isn't complicated enough, or it's not big and cool enough, and just be like, what does this film need? And just answer that question as best as you can. And so that's why we start there. And then, you know, from there, I step away and I try to do it, which is to this day remains the hardest thing. Yeah.
You have your writers, your directors, your producers, your composers, and it's
team.
like, it's a really big team.
Yeah.
But everybody has to come together and kind of find that cohesive vision
Totally.
for the film to make it work,
Right.
everything work together.
Right, because worst case scenario, right, is everyone is doing their thing, devoid of a direction. And that's why directors are like the most important person on a film, is because if there isn't one vision unifying everyone's individual artistic efforts with their own sensibilities, because you do bring that. It's not like you get rid of your sense of self or anything, but it's all in service to the direction that the director is trying to take the film. And when that works, I mean, that, you know, that's how you get Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Like, that's how you get these epics that seem to like be beyond what any one person or even group of people could accomplish. Like, somehow they're bigger than life.
Yeah.
And that happens when all of these disparate people and skill sets serve one direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Walk me through a little bit, like technically? Like, what's the process?
How technical do you want me to get? This will be really enjoyable for the composers.
We'll be a little bit technical, and then we'll go a little broad.
Let's say we're at the point now. We've had the spotting session. The director has given me leave to step back and actually start writing music for the film. So at that point, let's use a scene as an example. I will be sent a version of the film without any music. So it'll just have dialogue and any temporary sound effects. Usually sound effects aren't done at that point either. Mm-hmm. I will also be sent any temp music they've done. And I will. Oh,
so generally, you guys composers have like a love-hate relationship with temp music. Is that true?
Yeah, I actually like that you said love-hate. I think that the stereotypical view is that composers just hate it, and that is true a large amount of the time. But equally bad is a director with no idea what they want the music to be, and no temp, or at least they say they don't. And so they say, just do your thing. And then you go do your thing. And they're like, yeah, but that's not like the Batman soundtrack. And you're like, what do you mean? You wanted it to be like that? And they're like, I guess I did. It's like, okay, in that sense, like, put the temp in. So I know, I at least have an idea of like what direction is your expectations. So in that sense, temp can be beautiful because it keys you into a lot of things in terms of what they're expecting. Now, on the other hand, if they do temp that they love, you're, as a young, inexperienced composer relatively, with basically no budget, being expected to do Hans Zimmer. And the reality is, I'm not saying you can't do something as good or better. You just can't do that. You can't. You can write better music than that. You can make a better score than that. I believe that. But you cannot make the Dark Knight soundtrack with no money. Like, you can't do it. The amount of resources that you need to accomplish that. And so when you have temp music and they're so sold on that being exactly what it needs to be, you're fighting a losing battle. And it's trying, and it's hard to get people. You can't ever say to someone, have an open mind. I mean, that's how you lose a job. And I get it. I sympathize with the desire to, match that level of excellence. It's just sometimes it's convincing people we can make something that good. It's just not going to be that. Maybe this film is more intimate. It doesn't need 150 people at Sony. Like it just needs like me in a room with a clarinetist. And it's just getting people to be open to that and to try and do something new that temp music can fight against sometimes. So that's the temp music spiel. Back to your original question. So when I pull that in, I use Cubase as my DAW, digital audio workstation. There are lots of other ones like Pro Tools, Logic, Studio One, Reaper. And basically it can house the film within, and then it has bars and beats and tempos, and you can load what are called virtual instruments. And so I have a MIDI keyboard, and that MIDI keyboard can trigger any number of sounds on my computer. And so I've spent a lot of time and a lot of money compiling sounds that I think are cool, whether that be violins for a traditional orchestral thing, or like wild, crazy synth sounds I've made or recorded or whatever. And then at that point, it is actually a matter of sitting down, watching the scene I'm going to score, thinking a little bit about hit points, like what do I want to draw attention to? How do I want this to be paced? What are the moments that need to land and in what way? And then I'll start pulling up sounds, and maybe I play piano while watching the scene, or I just try to come up with some textures or some ambience or ideas that sort of feel like the scene. I know a lot of people will write music ahead of time, like work out themes away from the film and then implement them. I do that sometimes. I find, though, I write the best, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. I write the best themes when I'm writing them directly to the film. In my sense, I feel like I discover them more than I create them. And so when I'm writing music, like I'll literally start scoring a scene without any idea of what melody or chord progression I'm going to use. And I let the scene tell me. And then after a while, I'll realize, oh, I'm using this one a lot. This must be so-and-so's theme. Or this must be this vibe theme, and I didn't impose that on the film. The film kind of told me, and I found it as I went along. And that can be frustrating for some directors because a lot of people kind of want to hear their stuff almost like the finished thing before it's ever scored to the film. And I just feel like I'm most inspired by the film itself, and I'm most informed what to write by the film itself. So it literally is, for me, pull up some sounds, and start making some music. Wow. And just watching it. And always watch it with dialogue, with everything on, and just always thinking about how is the finished product going to sound. I find if I start separating away from the film in any way is when I go off.
I think it's really cool to kind of see that side of filmmaking, which is, I don't know, oftentimes I feel like that's like the last thing that filmmakers come. They're like, they've done everything first, and then they're like, oh wait, we have to put music in it.
Yeah. And they've run out of money.
They've run out of money.
Yeah.
But I think when you can incorporate music, like my brother is the same way. Like he directs and writes, and for him, like he'll be actually writing his movie and listening to soundtracks while he's writing. And for him, it's such an important part of the process because it informs the characters, it informs the tone and the mood and the feel of everything so much. So yeah, he's always just like, we got to get right off the bat. He's like, before we've even shot anything, he's like coming up with themes, and he's like, you got to work with this. And it's like, okay, well, all right.
This is Brandon.
Yeah, my brother.
And, I've written a lot of music for Brandon, and Brandon is the person more than anyone else by a long shot who I've written music for without any footage. Brandon is, he'll text me and just say, I need a piece of music that does this. And I'm like, okay, what, like, do you have shot anything? He's like, nope, just write it. And then, and I get that, and I respect that. I mean, it's, as inspired as I am by seeing the film and writing music to it, it seems like for directors like Brandon, they have that experience backwards.
Yeah, he's inspired by the music.
Informs the story and the cinematography, and that's amazing. It's it's a different thing, but it is really cool. Yeah.
What's it been like working on some of his projects? You've done a couple with him. What's that process?
Yeah, I don't know if perfectionist isn't the right word. He just has an insanely high standard for himself.
Yeah, and he expects that from the people around him.
He does, which is great. He's gotten a lot better at. And I've gotten a lot better as well at communicating and figuring out, like, okay, how do we push ourselves to do the best possible thing and be kind to each other and be respectful of one another. And I think that we've always been able to do that, but I think that over the years it's gotten a lot better. And so, and I mean, that's the thing, the nature of these things, particularly the director to composer relationship. The reality is it's like the president having veto power. Like, you can spend all time writing and passing a bill, and then the president can just be like, nope. And that's an interesting dynamic because it's not often in life where someone can just say no. Like, this is the thing that I think people don't understand about making film music. When you write music for yourself, you can't show it to someone and then have them, like, imagine if you just imagine you're a child. I have a son. Imagine he comes home from preschool, he's done some art, and he shows it to me, and I just say, you're going to need to try that again. Why don't you take that back? Why don't you try that again? That would be like heartbreaking for him. Yeah. And being a film composer is that every single day, basically. It's someone with the power to completely redirect your efforts.
Yeah, and especially if you spent a bunch of time and blood, sweat, and tears pouring into it, and then they're just like, no.
Right. Going back to the specific question of working on Brandon's projects, we did that trailer for Familiar, and I wrote so much music for that thing. It was a 2-3 minute trailer.
Yeah, I was really sure.
I probably wrote an hour of music, and the reality is, the undeniability of this process with people like Brandon is, the best music I wrote was what ended up in it. And even if the first piece I wrote, which I remember and I like it, it would not have worked for the trailer in retrospect. And I think that was a compromise on one sense, because it was Brandon's relentless desire for excellence. And it's not even just like it needs to be good, but it needs to be perfect for the thing. And that helped. But then the other thing was, by the time we had written a lot of the music, we finally got to the point where a lot of it had been animated. And so now I was able to do the part that I love, which is actually start to score it. And the marriage of those two things, of like a lot of work ahead of time and then getting to start to apply that work to footage, I think is where we found that kind of perfect marriage of both of our processes. And I think it holds up. I really like the music on that. And yeah, it's just, it's, everyone has a different process. I think the thing that makes me excited is people who are passionate about what they're working on and who take it very seriously. And that's Brandon to a T. This has been Brandon Shoutout.
Brandon Shoutout.
I'm going to get a phone call after this podcast airs.
This is not sponsored by Brandon. Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I mean, I think that is really important. Like, I think finding and obviously it's going to depend on the director you're working with. So, yeah. Whoever you're working with, there's going to be a different kind of relationship, a different dynamic.
100%.
Yeah, and I feel like you have to give some time to feel that out, especially when you're working with someone you haven't worked with before.
Absolutely.
You have to kind of see, okay, what is this director, the communication thing. It's like, how are they communicating with me? What are they trying? What's the vision in their head they're trying to get out? And like with the music, how do I help them get that out? And how do we communicate that effectively? Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the business being such a people-oriented business, is that takes some like socio-philosophical, psychological skill and insight. And that's the thing. I think that no amount of, if you're the best composer in the world, you're still going to spend a lot of time learning those skills. I'm still learning those skills because, like you said, every person you work with, different. And how are you sensitive to that in such a way that you can make something excellent together and you can make them feel comfortable? So often, you mentioned earlier that it's the afterthought. Music is often the afterthought.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. The reality is people come to you with their films. They're, sometimes weeks away from a finish line, and they're doubting themselves, and they're underfed. They haven't slept enough. They feels like they're hurtling towards a deadline that they don't think they're gonna make, and all of a sudden they have to allow someone in to potentially completely change the feeling of their entire project. And so I have so much sympathy for directors because I'm about to step in and it might feel like I just stomp all over your preschool art piece because I'm just changing everything. I mean, music changes so much. And so if you can give directors and producers confidence and make them feel comfortable, like, guys, this is going to get finished and you're going to be happy with it, that's like the biggest thing. How do you make people comfortable? How do you give them confidence that this baby that they've spent all of this time creating, like, will see the light of day and will be something they're proud of? It's hard, but I think that's a big part of film composing, funnily enough.
So what are some of your favorite films that you've worked on?
I think the film, and I wish it was available for the public to see. It will be soonish. It's doing the festival circuit right now. It's a film called Afro-Lenin. DeWitt is the director, and it was a strange process because it was one of those where they came to me 2 weeks away from a deadline. Something had happened with music, and basically they were like, just please, can we like make this work? And so I feel like I thrive under those conditions. If I have all the time in the world, I won't do anything good. I won't do anything good. If it's on the line, I feel like that's when I'm like fired up, because what I was talking about earlier, I'm most excited about the next project. When the time between that excitement and the delivery is really short, I can sustain that excitement and creativity through that. And this film is just absolutely stunning. It's set in Ethiopia, and it's sort of, I won't give away. It's very, very short film, so I at the risk of actually giving away the entire plot, I won't do that. It follows a horrific event and sort of an explanation, or an exploration, I should say, of forgiveness and mercy and change in the course of that. And it just on a human level, incredibly profound. It was also shot on black and white film, and the cinematography is unbelievable. It just got accepted to Camera Image in Poland, the cinematography festival. Yeah. It was one of those where music had nothing to solve. My concern was music could make this worse. Mm-hmm. And when you're starting from there, I mean, there's nothing more motivating, because it frees you up from the scene isn't really working. It's like, is there a way we could give it some energy, make it happen? And instead, it's like, this is working. How do we take it to the next level? And that's like so exciting. And so I feel like we were able to do that. We also, the director had Ethiopian friend from back in Ethiopia, a musician, do some like very traditional musical performances, and we incorporated those into the score. It was just inspiring on like every level, and that's probably the thing I'm most proud of up to this point. I also do a lot of work on podcasts, funnily enough, and there's a particular production company called Homestead on the Corner, and the director, producer, writer, Trevor Van Winkle, who his projects are just so inspiring. He's just such a relentlessly creative person, and just the kind of storyteller he is, and the way he tells these stories are just so amazing. And we've done so many of them. Like I mean, I don't know the number, but the amount of episodes of audio drama podcasts that have my music in them with him is like very, very big. Like it's I don't know, it's a lot. And so those are two of the things that I'm like absolutely most proud of up to this point.
What's it like working on an audio drama? Because there's no visual. I feel like that's very different. Right?
It is very different. And what's funny about it is like I didn't even know it existed. That was another kind of moment of, I just assumed all podcasts pulled stuff off of like elephant music or whatever. It's tricky because there's no visual element. The number of storytelling tools you have is cut almost in half. It's less than half, because you still have acting, right. You still have sound effects, and you still have music. So maybe it's cut by a fourth. Mm-hmm. But because all you're doing is hearing, music can derail in a big way. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a film, music can take over, and you can get these sweeping shots of the dune desert or whatever. You don't really have those moments in an audio drama. In an audio drama, if you miss a line of dialogue, you could miss an incredibly important plot point and not catch back on.
Right.
So podcast music is so subtle, which has been a great experience for me, because I've taken a lot of what I've learned doing audio dramas back to film. The reality is, like, if music in film, in audio dramas, in whatever ever takes you out of the story, it's bad. And the more complex the music is, the more likely it is to do that. And so audio dramas has taught me a lot about living in the background, but just kind of girding up and giving life to the story. It's like a bubbling creek in a way. And I've learned a lot about that. But yeah, it's tricky for sure. And I still think I write too much music. I'm always trying to remind myself, like, strip it down. There's another, I just was in LA last weekend doing a recording session for another podcast. It's a documentary through Cast Media called Lost in Panama. Worked with two other composers on that, Andrew and Colin. That was a great experience, because Colin, who wrote like all the themes for it, was so grounded, because he's also the producer of the project. He might edit too, but he was so grounded in what is the simplest version of this, the most bang for the least amount of buck, like how do we make this as impactful as it can be without ever going above and becoming distracting. And having another composer kind of hold me accountable to that, I learned a lot through that process with him. So I've been thinking a lot about this over the last couple of weeks because it just came off that project, and I feel like I learned a lot about. Sometimes it's just a marimba doing a thing, and like it's so giving yourself the liberty to be that bold. It's like there's nothing to hide behind.
Yeah. What's it like working with other composers? Because does that happen very often where you're brought in to work with other composers, and like is there conflicting ideas, or like how do you?
In some ways, working with other composers is easier than working with directors.
Really?
What is it people say, like the most dangerous thing is like someone with a little bit of knowledge. When it's composer to composer, there's a perfectly fluid line of communication. Also, there's a lot of camaraderie because you're both, or all three or whatever, accountable to the same director. And so if you have people who are devoid of ego, it is great. And I really only try to work with people who are like that because it can get messy otherwise. And when you're working on a project with multiple composers, the best idea just has to win. And if that means it's not mine, like great. And if everyone can be that way and everyone can be honest and not precious, it's really great, honestly, because it composing can be such a lonely thing. You know, like I sit alone in a studio for 10 to 12 hours a day.
Yeah, it's sort of like writing a script.
Yeah.
Same idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. The time you do interact with people, they're telling you what you did was wrong. So that's such a pessimistic view of like my favorite thing in the world. It is better than that. But that, you know, if you reduce it down, it feels like that. When you're working with other composers, you're checking in throughout the day. You're bouncing ideas off of each other. I think I have a unique experience in this because, speaking again about people reaching down and pulling up, Andrew Gerlicher is a composer who, if I'm ever lucky enough one day to give some sort of awards speech, like he will be the first person, I think. He just shortly after Biola plucked me up, met him through Brandon, so that's another Biola connection, picked me up and was like, I need help. I think you can help me, and just kind of threw me into the deep end. And we've worked together now for 4 years, going on 5. The amount of things I've learned from him, and he's such a great example of someone who has no ego. Like I can't tell you, I was so surprised. I thought I was going to be pouring coffee the first day I showed up to his studio. And I show up and he goes, hey man, I've got meetings the rest of the afternoon. Here's this scene. It's a big car explosion, kind of a climactic scene. I got to deliver it by the end of the day. I'll be back in 4 hours. Like, good luck. And I was like, I literally was expecting to like make him coffee. Like,
wow.
And so we've worked together ever since then. I work on like all of his projects with him. When he has the time, I try to help him work on mine. And it's just been such a great relationship. And the way that, in an ideal world, talking more just about working with composers in general, in an ideal world, I would obviously just be working on boutique scoring projects. But, you know, the number of those and the budgets for those are not like insane, right. You know, and I have to put food on the table. So another aspect of what I do is other composers higher up working on bigger budget projects will have me come in and either do arranging for them, orchestration for them, just additional production, sometimes actually writing. And so I do a fair amount of that as well. And that work is great because I'm kind of pulled. I'm no longer the one receiving the criticism. I just get to like try stuff and experiment and have fun and sort of follow the other composer's direction. And I do like doing that kind of work, and I do a good amount of that because the act of scoring a film, it takes an army. Like a film takes an army. Even scoring a film takes an army. And so it's not uncommon for composers to have teams of people. And so being a part of those teams is great. I love it. And I get to work on stuff that, you know, otherwise I would never get to work on. And sometimes you can't talk about it,
right? Which
is hard because there are things that I've done that's like, I wish people could know that I've done this. But I always learn something. You get a privileged look into higher levels of industry that you otherwise would not. And all the composers I work for, I've yet to work for a composer whom I don't end up being friends with. I mean, I just absolutely love them, and I can send them contracts, and it's just like, it's like a mentorship thing. And so I really, really enjoy working with other composers for sure.
Yeah.
And hopefully one day can do more of that myself as the budgets get bigger and I can pull people on, and you know.
I tell people all the time, it's like the people that you're with. Like, if you're around good people, it's going to be a great project.
Yeah.
And that's so important, just to develop those relationships. And that's how you get your work, and that's how you like enjoy what you do.
Yeah.
Is being around good people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I know you've done some work like working with musicians.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about that, like what that relationship is like, and finding good musicians and communicating with them?
Obviously, the best part of the job is sitting down to watch a movie that works.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anything as good as that, it is sitting down with musicians and making music together. I mean, it is, I think, the thing that got me into music in the first place, this desire to create something that I felt like I could own in a deep way artistically, and the camaraderie of creating it with other people. Mm. And I mentioned at the beginning that I started in a band. Right. And so my music writing at first was not sitting alone and then bringing it. It was in a room of 5 guys trying to make stuff. Mm. And so that, it has always been such a big part of what I love about making music. And then as I got into college and started doing it more for film, that sort of went away because, now you have to write a lot of music in a very short amount of time. You're accountable to a director who's your main collaborator. And so, there's not money to hire people. There's not resources to record them. Mm. So it just became kind of all on the computer and, get through it, do the best you can with what you have. And then now, as budgets have gotten a little bit bigger, I've been able to, over the last couple of years, start recording people more often. And I do it in 2 different ways. Well, 3 different ways. The first way is I want to feature a soloist on the score, someone who has more of a collaborative role. Bring them into the studio. Maybe we come up with ideas together. Maybe I've had a lot of, like, for example, for Brandon's Familiar trailer, we brought in Pearl Botts, who's an amazing vocalist, and just came up with ideas together in the studio. And then I took that home, chopped it up, put stuff together, brought her back in, did it again. And so that, I love that. And I think if there's anything I could build into budgets for the rest of my life, it's having sessions like that regularly on all my scores with musicians. Just people who are excellent at creating music. Because music is not MIDI notes in a DAW. It is not even notes on a page. Like, it's sound traveling through air. And I have the privilege to write music, but I don't do a lot of creating it. Like, that's musicians' job. And so getting people in who that's what they excel at, that's the thing they're amazing with. And then, talking to vocalists, what's like something you can do with your voice that I would never think of? Like, I thinking about that specific question, I don't know if you've seen Don't Worry, Darling. Have you seen that movie? Mm-hmm. Yeah. John Powell's score, what him and Holly, I think is her name, did with the vocal stuff on this, it's just like, and it's that John, as good of a composer as he is, could not have done that devoid of his collaboration with Holly, because she's a vocalist and she knows her voice and the human voice better than he does even. And so having that input is just amazing. And so that's one way. Another way is something like what I did last weekend, which is getting a small group of musicians together in the studio. And that is less collaborative in the sense that we're not necessarily going to play things that haven't been predetermined. Mm-hmm. But it is collaborative in that we're trying to figure out feel and how to bring out a performance and how to breathe life into an otherwise sterile thing. Because computer sounds are incredible. But no matter how good they sound, it's just, I think it's just ancestral. We, as humans, we've heard music performed from before we could speak, I feel like. And it's just so ingrained in us. And so hearing humans perform music is always going to be better. It's going to serve a human story better. And it's just going to take you places that the computer might not. So that's a big part of it. And then the last way, and this is something that's sort of like a modern phenomenon that I love, is I do a lot of remote recording with orchestras around the world. So that is that is the least collaborative in the sense that I'll hire them for 30 minutes, get all the music written, sent over, jump on Zoom, give some notes, get 2 or 3 takes, and move on. But that is the fact that we're able to do that. I mean, the budget of projects I've worked on, if you compare those budgets to the fact that we got live orchestra on them, that would not have been possible even 10 years ago. And so the accessibility that those remote recording orchestras provide is just unbelievable. And I love those sessions because it's such a one-to-one example of this is what it sounds like on the computer. This is what it sounds like with an orchestra. And it is just, every time I record live musicians, I ask myself, why do I ever not do this? Like, even if I have to spend every dollar I make, I want to do it every time. I'm such a romantic about it. I love it so much. It adds layers of complexity and difficulty to the process, but it's worth it every time. So.
Oh, well said.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I love musicians.
Yeah. The way it touches your soul and makes you feel.
Yeah.
You know, like it's so moving and so it crosses boundaries, it crosses languages, like it's so universal, like just music itself. Yeah. And it really makes such a huge impact on film and just like on people. Like that's why we love music and we listen to music all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a privilege to participate in. And that's, you know, if there's anything, like if this is inspiring to anyone, what I would say, I have my wife's brother. I was talking with him, this was years ago, and he was, you know, talking to me about music because I make music and he knows that. And he was saying, my whole life I've wished I learned to play guitar. And I just looked at him and I was like, go learn. And he did. And he loves it. And he plays all the time.
What are some of the lessons that you've learned over the years?
Some of the big ones are don't be precious about everything. And this comes back to the ego thing we were talking about before. I think the thing that holds artists back the most is feeling like everything they make needs to be the impenetrable best thing in the universe. And the reality is that you're going to make a billion bad things before you make one good one. Typically, there are maybe exceptions to that rule. I understand being your biggest critic and holding yourself to a standard. But if you do that to the point where it debilitates your creative process and keeps you from writing or creating, you are only hurting yourself. You will not make things. And I guess what I mean to say, it's more important to make things than to not make things. And so when I start a film, I always start feeling precious in the sense that I won't finish a pass at a scene because it's not perfect. And so I'm putting it off. Or I write something I think is perfect and I get precious about it. And then when the director says, I don't really think that's the right direction, I think I'm worthless. I think that I'm no good at what I do. And in both of those cases, I've lost. And so finding ways to recognize that I'm going to make something. It may or may not be right, but I'm going to make it. And if I do that enough, I'll probably make some stuff I'm happy with. And I'll probably make some stuff that other people are happy with. And as long as me, the musicians, the director, the producers are all aimed at the goal of making the best possible music for the project, we're going to get there. The only way we don't get there is if I stop making stuff. And the easiest way to stop making stuff is to be precious about everything. So that's a really big thing. And that also ties into the art you make is not who you are. And that's so like against, I feel like the cultural thing, this song is me, and like I get that, and obviously we put ourselves into our art. I'm not saying we don't, and I'm not saying that's not important. But if people don't like the stuff you make, that means nothing about who you are. That means nothing about what you're worth or how good you are at it. It's so subjective. I mean, making something as radically vague as music and expecting every human to connect with it the same way is lunacy. Just realizing if you just make stuff you like and don't worry about what other people are going to think. That's so hard. And I don't mean that in the sense stick up to directors and be like, your vision is wrong, mine is right. What I mean is, if you make something and you did it more simply than you've heard other people do it, or you used a different instrument or color in a style of music than is normally used, but you like it, who cares? Just do it that way. It will either resonate with people or it won't, but you're not any less, talented or accomplished just because you did something differently. Those are probably like the biggest lessons. The only other thing that comes to mind immediately is get really good at figuring out how to say yes and no to projects. What I mean by that is, it's hard to know what projects are worth doing. And if you're bad at answering that question, you will become burnt out and or miss out on opportunities. There was a point while I was at Biola, I got very full of myself. And I think I told my dad this. I was like, I'll never work for free again. And I turned down 3 films that year, which I think may have been the coolest 3 films I've ever been offered. And in retrospect, like if you want to talk about regrets, like that is some huge regrets, because it was after that I realized, who am I? Like if someone wants me to score their incredible thing and they don't have money for me to do it, if I love it and it's going to be valuable because it's meaningful and beautiful and it'll be a great thing to show people, to be a great person to make a relationship with, why would I say no to that? And so over the years, I've just refined and realized there are projects I make a lot of money on. There are projects I make no money on, and it evens out. And it's always a matter of like, who are the people I'm going to be working with? What is the budget? And what is the project? And if like 2 of those things are beneficial, I'll do it. If it pays great and the people are great and the project is like, like, of course I'm going to do it, right? If the people are great and the project is great and they've got no money, I'm going to do it. It's just gauging that and knowing what to say yes to goes a long way. And on the other end, it's like saying no to stuff. After that regret, I got bad at saying no to things. And like, I have a family and kids and I want to see them. And it would be very easy for me to never see them. Like, it's a career which there are no boundaries unless you set them for yourself. And so I remember I watched an interview in college with Michael Giacchino, who said, someone asked him like, how do you write all this music? And he's like, I work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. And the other composers in the room are like, what? And I literally, that interview, I was like, oh, that's going to be me. And I'm not perfect. Like, for a long time I was working 5 to 5. Now I'm working maybe more like 6 to 5. But like, I'll take breaks in the middle of the day to like take my wife lunch or whatever. I do everything in my power not to work weekends. It's just, if you don't set boundaries, no one's going to set them for you. And I think the reason, honestly, that I've been successful-ish and that I still love it is because I've set those boundaries. So that said, podcast audience, listen to nothing I say, because I don't know you and I don't know what I'm talking about. That's just my personal experience and the things that I personally have learned.
Well, it sounds good to me.
Okay. Yeah. You get the Nathan sign of approval.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll check off. Cool. Do you have any other final thoughts? Or, I feel like we covered a lot.
Yeah, we covered a lot of it. No, thank you so much for having me. This is so cool to be a part of. It's honestly just great to see you again.
Yeah.
And to have like a forced medium with which to reconnect.
Yes.
And yeah, it's it's really great to be here. I'm excited about this. The podcast seems awesome, and I'm just very, very honored that you had me on.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to have you, and I just hearing this conversation, I've learned so much about the whole process, and yeah, I love talking with wonderful, amazing people, and I know like you especially, like, you've been a really big influence on me and my brother Brandon as well. You know, we've worked together a lot, and you know, we don't take that lightly. So
Thanks,
yeah,
man.
we appreciate all
I
that you've done
appreciate
for
that.
us. Yeah,
The last thing I'll say is that Nathan shot my wedding video,
that is true.
which I still love.
Oh man,
I love it very much. And now that marriage produced 2 children. So
come full circle.
it's right. It's right. Yeah.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thank you guys so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys next time.